Connor, can you hear me all right? Oh yeah, I got you on mute, sorry. That was a little trick. All right, so thank you everyone for showing up. I put everyone on mute for the time being. And I'm gonna start with a little bit of an introduction. So my name is Benjamin Myers. I'm the Growers Program Manager for Fringe Coffee. And this is a little kind of online Zoom series that I've kind of started up, and I'm calling it Coffee Dialogues. I took the term dialogue from renowned physicist David Bohm as a way of kind of approaching group conversation in maybe a little bit of a different manner. We're not necessarily going to use the dialogue that David Bohm put forward, but I do hope that we are going to kind of converse in a little bit of a different manner. We're going to take specific topics in the kind of greater coffee ecosystem and bring in two different experts in that field to kind of give a short presentation, probably about a half an hour worth of presentation. And then we're going to kind of move into a question and answer period. So if you do want to kind of ask specific questions, you can write them in the little notes or the questions section, and then I'll pull them up at the end. So if something comes up in the middle of one of their presentations, we can return to it later in the dialogue and have some more conversation around it. So today we're starting off with the subject is it's called Soil Health and Coffee Wealth. And the kind of idea is that if you have good and healthy soil, then you're probably going to have a very good chance of growing some great coffee. For those who are unfamiliar with Fringe Coffee, we're a California-based vertically integrated coffee growers network. We have approximately 65 different sites around southern coastal California where coffee is under production. And one of the key values that we try to add to our growers network is creating an ongoing education opportunity. So this would kind of fall into that. So today, our two experts are Dr. Andrew Margenot and Connor Mclleland. Sorry if I butchered your last names. A brief introduction about Dr. Andrew. He's a professor at University of Illinois, College of Agriculture, Consumer and Environmental Sciences in the Division of Crop Sciences. Andrew addresses the literal foundation of all cropping systems, soils. He is advancing how we monitor and manage soils as natural capital. His research team evaluates how human activities can enhance or compromise soil services to human societies, with an emphasis on food security from urban and rural agroecosystems in the US, Midwest, and East Africa. And Andrew has extensive experience in working with coffee growing communities abroad. We are currently collaborating with Andrew on a grant project in conjunction with Fringe Coffee and Whittier College, where we are doing a multi-location research project on 4 different California coffee farms, studying select varietal chemical compositions in the soil, cherry, and seed. We call the seed a bean. And we've just begun that study, so we're excited to be working with Andrew on that, and I'm going to prompt him to maybe share a little bit about that if he can. And our second expert is Connor. Connor is an agronomist, a certified crop advisor, and agricultural pest control advisor. He has his BS in agronomy from soil science at Kansas State University. Connor is the founder of the San Diego Agricultural Laboratory, which provides soil testing, leaf tissue testing, water testing, pathogen testing, and crop consulting services to growers in San Diego, Riverside, and Orange County. Connor is also a team member with Fringe Coffee. He works closely with our San Diego farms and is a field manager. So he has a lot of experience in working with coffee growing in Southern California. And before we get started, just a little promo for our next coffee dialogue. We will be gathering on September 17th to explore the topic biological activity and cup qualities. The speakers for that dialogue will be Dr. Cinzia Fizzore from Whittier College. She's the chair of the biology department, and Dr. Fernandez, who is the Specialty Coffee Association Technical Director. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to Connor. I'm going to unmute you. I've asked to unmute you. I think you've accepted.
There we go.
Now,
all right. Can everybody hear me? All right. Well, yeah. So as Ben said, my name is Connor Mclleland. I am the owner of San Diego Agricultural Laboratory based in Fallbrook, and I serve as the farm advisor for Fringe Coffee. So working with San Diego Agricultural Laboratory, we work primarily with avocado and citrus growers down here in San Diego, Orange County, and Riverside County. Primarily what we do is we do soil testing and leaf tissue testing, and also water testing. And basically as a grower, you receive these results back, and they're reported in parts per million of, phosphorus or whatever it may be. And my job as a crop advisor is to take your soil test, water test, and leaf tissue test data and turn that into more of a comprehensive plan as far as, okay, we've got this data, now what do I do with it? So I can show you, and I might be young, but I'm not great with technology, so I'm gonna try and do a screen share here. Ben, do you mind? It says you've disabled my screen share. Do you have a couple? Is it activated yet? Let me. Oh, there's Ben. Let's see. Okay. Ben, do you know, are we going to be able to share the screen, or should I just continue? I also can't hear you, Ben. You're muted.
I'm going to try to figure that out. So let's see. I see. Let's see. I'm going to unmute everyone, and maybe somebody can tell me. So maybe somebody knows how to do it.
Yes.
Participants.
If you go down at the bottom of your screen, you see that it says share screen. And if you click there, it should give you options, including a participant to share their screen, and you want to select that one. Assuming that
I just did that. Try again, Connor.
Okay. All right, and let's see.
Nice.
Here we go. So can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So what we do in the lab is, so this is a sample of our coffee leaf tissue analysis. So we take soil analyses and we also take leaf tissue analyses. So you can see what nutrients are available in the soil, and then you can see what the plant is actually able to take up from the soil. So these, like this reporting format here, you've got, can you guys see my cursor moving around on the screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you have, when you get your report back, you get all of your macronutrients and your micronutrients. So you have your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, sulfur, and then your micros, which are zinc, manganese, copper, iron, and boron. And this shows you what the plant has. So the second line here shows you what your leaf tissue has in it. And then you have these ideal ranges that have been established by the universities that you're trying to get your plant to have within that range of nutrition within the leaf tissue. And then we also have a sample soil analysis here. So typically what you would want to do is you would want to take a paired soil and leaf analysis at the same time to determine what your plant needs based on the tissue analysis, and then what's available in the soil based on the soil analysis. And from that, we can come up with a nutrient management plan in order to increase the nutrients that we need to in the coffee tissue itself to create a healthier plant. So as you can see from this tissue analysis that we have here, it's a sample, but it's pretty representative of things we've seen down here in San Diego County, where you have a little bit low nitrogen, a little bit low potassium, and a little bit low in zinc. And then if you kind of compare that to your soil analysis, you've got, for the first thing you'll notice here, and it's something that we see frequently in San Diego County, is you have high pH soil. So San Diego County, our irrigation water at San Diego and Riverside County, our irrigation water, the pH is 7.8 to 7.9 if you're purchasing it from the water districts, or if you have your own private well, it's typically anywhere from 7.2 to 8.1. So the irrigation water that we're using is alkaline, whereas coffee plants prefer an acidic soil environment. So with the amount of irrigation that's required in San Diego County, you're constantly bringing the soil pH up every time you irrigate because we have alkaline irrigation water. So something that we see very often is if that's not managed over a period of years, you end up with a pH of around 7.8 to 7.9 because that's the pH of your irrigation water. We also have low organic matter soils, as you can see, and we typically have low potassium levels. And on the next page, we have and then you have also your micronutrient levels. So although we have a wide range of soils in San Diego County, we're primarily farming coffee on hillsides, and the majority of our coffee plantings are in low fertility, decomposed granite soils. So they're very light, sandy soils with minimal nutrition in the soils. So that's something that we're constantly battling as well in San Diego County, is both how to get nutrition into the soil, but also, since we have sandier soils, on the whole, obviously, we do have growers who have heavier clay soils in certain parts of the county. But one of the issues with the sandy soils is they don't necessarily hold on to nutrients. The nutrients leach through the soil profile as you're irrigating. The water that you're irrigating with, it pushes the nutrients down below the primary root zone of the coffee, especially in the first couple of years when the roots aren't as deep or well established. So you end up with a lot of nutritional issues in the coffee. Whereas the majority of the world, from my experience, grows coffee in very acidic and typically heavier clay soils that cycle nutrients a little bit better. We have sandier soils, but it's more challenging to do that. So there is kind of this need to, as a grower, you have to kind of approach your soil fertility from two different, and I think maybe I'll go back to, I just wanted to show you guys so that's the data that we're working with basically. And my job is to take that data and all these numbers that are reported, parts per million, milliequivalents per 100 grams, pH, this is estimated nitrogen release. My job is to take those numbers and make them mean something on the farm. So that was kind of the little sharing portion. But so as a grower in San Diego County, you have to be, amending the soil with fertilizers to help the plants grow and develop. But you also have to have kind of a more long-term soil management plan where you're trying to, increase the organic matter in the soil so that you can be cycling those nutrients more efficiently. Because the organic matter in the soil, since we don't have a lot of heavy clay soils here in San Diego County, the clays tend to hold on to nutrients more tightly. And so in the absence of the clays, the way for us in San Diego County to improve soil nutrient and water retention is to improve the organic matter of our soils. And so, it's kind of a two-pronged approach of, okay, here we have to have a nutrition program with, liquid fertilizers or dry granular hand-applied fertilizers, depending on what your farm is set up for. But then also kind of the long-term management of how do we build healthier soil that reduces our dependence on the weekly, bi-weekly inputs that we're having to kind of pump into the farm. And there's never, at least in my experience, it's very difficult to close the loop, because every time you're harvesting, the plant's taking up nutrients, putting it into the fruit and the seed, you're taking that, removing it from the farm. So something has to come back into the farm. And that's where the need for fertilizers arises. But, as much as possible, we want to try to, minimize the need for it, both from an economic standpoint and from an environmental standpoint, so that we're less reliant on those fertilizer applications as we kind of build the soil up to be a healthier soil. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation of what we do at, kind of my job, both at the lab and then at the, as the farm advisor for Fringe Coffee. So, we work on the fertility plan, and we have growers who are, using conventional synthetic fertilizers, organic liquid fertilizers, organic dry fertilizers. Foliar fertilization is something we're experimenting with. And, just looking at those fertilization practices and how we can optimize the plant health. But then also looking at, you know, mulching, cover crops, obviously with coffee being perennial, you know, there's not the need for tillage. So converting some of these previously tilled fields into perennials, you can reduce the tillage, which increases the organic matter. So those are kind of some of the long-term strategies we have in place for soil building, and in the mean, you know, and that is in combination with our fertilization plans. So that's kind of my, you know, the beginning. I know I kind of covered a lot. I don't know, Ben, if we want to get some questions in now, or how did you want to?
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll take questions. People can put them into the chat box as they come up. And then once we finish the presentations, we will kind of open up and go more into questions. And then if more questions come up there, we can delve into those as they come up. And yes, again, this is encouraged to be, you know, a dialogue, and questions are encouraged. So please feel free to ask them. Don't be embarrassed if you think, oh, everyone knows this but me. That's usually not the case. I was recently talking to Dr. Mark Gaskell, who is a UC Extension, former UC Extension agent, and he said there's 10 billion microorganisms in the soil, and we know less than 1% of what those are. So we're all kind of beginners when it comes to soil. I know very little myself, but one of the things that really captured my imagination in learning more about soil was the work of Hans Jenny. And Hans had a very interesting way of talking about soil, and his language was often almost symbolic, mathematic, and very a lot of diagrams. So his book, The Factors of Soil Formation, is very worthwhile book. And I always liked talking about his CLORPT formula. And CLORPT is basically climate, organisms, relief, parent material, and time. And I thought he has a very interesting way of thinking about soil, not just looking at what you can pick up in your hand, but thinking about the historical narrative of the culture involved in the practices that we're engaged on with the soil. So thank you, Connor. That was a great presentation. And now we'll turn to Dr. Andrew, if that's okay. Are you ready? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay. Can y'all see this? Cool. So as Ben said, this is probably best if a question comes up or a comment, speak up. It'd be good to have this as more of an exchange and as a dialogue. So my name is Andrew. I did my PhD at UC Davis in California. So just seeing all you Californians, I miss it already. I'm now at the University of Illinois, so I'm in the middle of the country in the Corn Belt, but my lab still does a lot of work on coffee. So I want to share with you some ideas. Yeah, it's a slideshow. I know that probably sets up some red flags for some of you, but I promise the slides are meant more as props, more as templates. There's some nice photos, and my thought is to make 3 or 4 major points on coffee and soils. I think when it comes to soil fertility and soil health, especially on the topic of coffee, and then furthermore on coffee in a new context like California, we don't really know much about how soils and plants interact. So Ben has brought up how there's all these different kinds of microbes in soils. Well, we know that microbes interface between the soil and the roots. And so there's a lot of interactions three-way that we haven't really parsed for most crops, and for coffee, there's pretty much nothing out there. So with that, I'll just dive right in. To give you some background of what coffee experience I have, I think Ben was too generous in saying that I'm very experienced. I'm not. I'm only 3 years into this. So I'm figuring it out just like all of you perhaps. Here's a map of sites where we have research sites for my lab. Some of these are pretty deep and some are more superficial. So they're in a few countries, and the one up in California is with Dr. Fisori at Whittier College, working with Fringe. And then once we get down into the tropical belt, which is just south of Cuba, is the official tropical belt, we have a bunch of sites in Central and South America. So the 3 main sites where we're working on Arabica in Honduras, in Gobán, pretty good coffees. They hit like 89 to 92 points. And then in Chimaltenango, which is South Central Guatemala, Arabica, lower cup quality in that region, more like 84 points. Soils are really sandy, like what you have in SoCal, but they're really acidic, not alkaline, because it rains probably about 2.5 meters of rainfall. So it's much wetter. And then we have a site in Ecuador in the Amazon, and yes, that's Robusta that you're seeing there. We're working on Robusta, specialty Robusta, trying to understand how agroforestry might lessen the harshness of that cup profile. So a key theme to what interests me, because I love coffee and then I do soil sciences, to what extent does soil help determine the final cup quality? That's the holy grail question. So I want to make a few points here on soils and coffee, and just to, I think, more to expose how little we as a human species know about this plant that we've domesticated. So we think of coffee, I think, far too often as being above ground. There's soils that are the literal foundation of these coffee systems, and these soils can vary quite a bit. So I think of Humans of New York. Have you all seen this social media project where a photographer takes photos of people on the street in New York and he just has them on a website? They're little vignettes. So I think of this as soils and their humans. If you think about cultural diversity of the human species is less than soil diversity. And so different societies interface with their biophysical context via soils. So in other words, if you're in Kansas on the far left or in Nigeria on the far right, you just have a different soil to work with. And typically that constrains crop types. So Connor just mentioned that coffee tends to like acidic soils. Coffee has been grown in Yemen, which is pretty much the same climate and soil types as Southern California. So the incursion of coffee out of the tropical belt presents some interesting questions on, well, how well could coffee do in non-acidic, non-tropical conditions? So soils are different. If you take something away from today, I hope it's that. How they're different is, well, just like you and me, we have different attributes, different features. We classify soil types by texture, mineralogy, structure, and these are abiotic, but they definitely constrain the biological possibility that can happen in soil. So soil health is within the soil type when it comes to things like texture, how much sand, silt, and clay. So we classify all these things in what we call the 12 orders. So soil nerds actually classify, there's a taxonomy of soil types. This is like how there used to be the 3 kingdoms of life, animal, plant, and I believe bacterial or fungi. Dr. Fisori can correct me here on this. So we classify 12 major types, and it's useful because, like all things in taxonomy, it lets us transfer knowledge. So whether you're in Kenya or in Guatemala, if you're on an oxisol, the properties are the same. So what varieties work well on that soil type should transfer pretty well. In the US, we're lucky, we have our soils mapped. Most of the developing world doesn't have soil maps. So this is also where importing knowledge and approaches from the tropics where coffee has been grown into the temperate regions might be tricky. So these soils are not equally distributed. There's certain patterns, and it's complex. In general, though, we find more weathered soils. I'll talk about that in a second. In the tropics, I guess the second point that you might take away from this is that there's no such thing as tropical soils. That is a non-scientific term. There's soils in the tropics, and soil diversity in the tropics is arguably as complex, if not more, than in the temperate zones. And coffee is grown on many different soil types in the tropical belt. So tropics is a climate, not a soil type. So in where you are in SoCal, there are some considerations here on, well, these soil types may not always be found, but they are not a majority in the tropics, but they can still be found in tropical regions, the soil types that you find yourself on. So if we think about, there's different species of coffee. Robusta is Canefra, for example, and we've got different varieties in this tree of coffee species. There's who knows how many unclassified species in the forests of Ethiopia. Well, to further complicate things, these will interact differently with their underlying soil tapestry of where they're grown. This further gets complicated when you consider that rootstocks are increasingly common for coffee. A lot of Robusta rootstocks are being used now for Arabica. This is like the world of wine. You probably hate me for making that comparison, so that's the only comparison of wine and coffee that I'll make. But the point here is that how you interface the biology, the species of the tree with the soil type can lead to very different outcomes. And these are all soils where coffee is grown. So let's start with one major point that I think opens possibilities for coffee in California is people seem to think that volcanic soils, whatever that is, are essential for good coffee and for good cup quality. I think there's a conflation here of high elevation with the soil type that you get. You tend to grow coffee at higher, above 1,000 meters. Increasingly, in where we're working in Guatemala, they're having to go to 1,400 to avoid rust. The point, though, is that there's nothing really consistent about volcanic soils, and well, here's why. So here's an example of a site in El Salvador, and you can see the different chocolate layers like a cake. These are from the different depositional events. So the volcano blew up outside of the capital, and it would put down a pillow of what's called tephra. You have those up in Lassen National Park in NorCal. Same idea. You put these big, thick deposits, and that's what you're seeing with the layering. So there seems to be this conception that that good coffee comes from volcanic soils. I don't think that's the case. So we talk about a coffee belt. There's also what you might call this tropical belt that is overlain with the coffee belt. And so the climatic definition of tropical does correspond with where the crop is grown. And if you look at lots of advertisements, I actually have a WhatsApp text group with some colleagues where we try to text photos of coffee bags that talk about volcanic soils because it's such a myth. And this is one example of this, where you see this incessant, this obsession with volcanic soils that they're somehow fertile. I can tell you from our site in Guatemala, it's an active volcano. It's the volcano that blew up in June 2019, Volcán del Fuego. It's an active volcano, and it is terrible soil because it's just beach sand, no fertility. As Connor pointed out, sandy soils can't hold on to nutrients. So rich soils aren't always volcanic. Here's the coffee belt. You can superimpose that with the volcanic belt, which is shown here in green. Obviously, coffee is grown in regions not shown in green. So a couple observations. Volcanic soils are known as andesols. They're not that common. Probably the biggest concentration is in Japan, a little bit in East Africa, and then a bit in Mexico, and then the Northwest region. Obviously, great coffees are grown in areas in the tropics that are not on andesols. So some examples would be the more weathered soils, what people tend to mistakenly call tropical. These are those red soils that you see. If you've ever been to the tropics, like Puerto Rico, Brazil, that red is the iron literally rusting out. So they're weathering over time. Great coffees are grown on oxasols. They're very low fertility, really acidic. Your soil's pH 7.7, oxasols pH 4, 4.5. Yet high cup quality. So I think there is some decoupling of soil types with good quality coffee. So here's another example of these labels that drive me nuts because they're misinformation. They talk about rich volcanic soils and they're also ancient soils. And so if we take this literally, volcanic would be on the right-hand side. This is an andesol in Ecuador where they are growing Arabica. This is around 1,400 meters on an active volcano in the Andes. Then on the left-hand side is a site from Kenya. We weren't doing coffee work there, but they were growing coffee, and it's an oxisol. That's the most ancient soil type. It's the old person of soils. So it's a contradiction to have ancient and volcanic. That by definition cannot happen. One example of, I don't want to say misinformation, but I think people should be more careful with this because it might lead to stereotypes that you can't grow good coffees in non-volcanic soils. So a little bit more about some examples. This is from Tanzania Arabica. This is actually my first encounter in grad school with coffee. It kind of triggered the whole, I wonder about this crop. And as you can see, the soil type is extremely weathered. It looks just like the one in Kenya, East Africa. Notice how they're intercropping quite heavily. We hear about how smallholders produce lots of the world's coffee, and it tends to not be in monoculture. I know, Ben, that this interests you. It tends to be grown not just with perennials, but also with annual crops, shown here, corn and cassava. And then we've got, this is a more famous farm in Western Panama. This is where the geisha that came to California came from itself. So the sequence that was published for Arabica came from Price Peterson's farm. This is his farm right here, and this is the geisha. So this is up in Boquete, the western part of Panama. It's on a volcano, and we have on the right-hand side your classic volcanic soil, andesol. So both good coffees in very different places. Now I want to talk about the diversity that one can get in very small spaces. This is also why we need to disabuse ourselves of the coffee soils or volcanic soils. So this is in El Salvador. Boquerón is the volcano that oversees the capital of San Salvador, and they grow coffee on it. So you can see on the right-hand side the layering of different depositional events. And so the very bottom one is red. That was an oxisol that was weathered, and then we had the rebirth of a new soil by dumping a lot of volcanic ash on top. And then about 200 meters away from this site, we had this other soil on the left. So in very short distance on the same volcano, very different soils. One is an andesol, one isn't. So again, trying to point out that there's a lot of soil diversity that we might be overlooking. And if we try to target how we manage by soil type, we might be missing this if we think of landform volcano as the criterion for how we manage coffee. So here's a good summary of, this is all from El Salvador, from one volcano, all the different soil types that we found. They're completely different. I was in heaven, as you can see, because these are gorgeous soils and they're completely different night and day in terms of the clay content, the pH, and even the striation or the horizonation of different layers. So I guess that's the second theme to think about is in the US, so in Southern California, you have the huge advantage of knowing what soil types you're on. I'm sure that the producers that you work with, or if you produce yourself, you're aware of the Soil Web survey. There's even an app on your phone that you can look at the soil type that you stand on. We've mapped soils to pretty high resolution so we can be aware of and then act on this underlying soil type diversity. To give you another example of how much soil type can differ in a short distance, this is back at the geisha farm in Panama. I was doing some profiling work there, looking at the profiles of the soil types, and less than 100 meters apart this time, and we have overall similar volcanic soil. You can see this very thick black topsoil, but then the chemistry was very different. So shown here, you've got pH, which is a good master variable. You jiggle that switch, everything else changes. And then we can see that the fertility differs here, focusing on phosphorus. So we can have very low or very high available. That's what the AV phosphorus means. So then the third point that I want to put out there is that Obviously, there are site-specific considerations, and this is not just soil type, but there's other things that interact with soil properties. So weather is an obvious one. The irrigation of coffee in Southern California is not the first time. In Yemen they irrigate coffee, so I think there is that precedent to look to. So this is an example, a figure that tried to quantify in Costa Rica what soil and non-soil attributes interactively determine yield gaps. So yield gap, the concept is you could yield this much, but you're at 80% of that. An idea here to consider is whether there might be quality gaps that are decoupled from yield gaps, right? So what if you increase yield, but you don't increase cup quality, or does it come at the expense of cup quality? I lied. Here's a second comparison with wine grapes. Sorry. More wine grape yield tends to come at a cost of quality, in part because you tend to, if you put on water and nutrients, plants aren't stressed, and so the grape has less flavor. For coffee, it's yet to be determined whether a yield increase will necessarily entail a quality penalty. Who knows? Maybe Fringe knows, but I've yet to see any research on that. So note that they looked at chemical properties of soils, what Connor's lab would be doing. And so one question, kind of the whole point of this discussion is, well, there's really not much work being done to integrate biological matrices of soil fertility. So soil health indicators. How we quantify soil health is a whole can of worms. A lot of work being done in the Midwest on how you quantify it. But we're thinking things like microflora counts, how abundant are earthworms, what are the microbes like in terms of their community composition, things like carbon, which is not a plant nutrient soil-wise, but does support the soil trophic web. These are all parameters that could be integrated into coffee soil science, but I don't think they have, simply by virtue of soil science approaches to coffee being relatively new. So there is not much done on soils. In summary, when it comes to coffee, there's a lot of unknowns. This, in this sense, I guess the California context is starting from scratch, but I think so is coffee soil science in general, right? So there's a chance, I think, to co-develop knowledge of soil health in California and in the classical tropical context. Yeah, I mean, that's the major takeaway here that I want to point out. And I saw one chat question, I think, but
what I did was I put in the UC Davis soil mapping website or tool that they put out there. It's something that I use on a regular basis when we're considering a new location. I find it to be a little bit different. You can't, difficult with putting in the address. I usually have to put in the town and then I'll kind of zoom in to the address. So I don't know if there's a better tool out there or I'm doing something wrong, but it's definitely worth looking into. It's a lot of really cool information. Yeah, Connor just put up another one.
Yeah, that's the USDA's web soil survey. So you can actually type in your address, and then there's a little tool that you can map out the specific borders of your farm. And then it'll give you a list of your soil types, which we do that for site visits, and we map it out, but then we also go in the field and verify that that is actually what's there, because it is a little bit of computer programming that's gone into projecting soil types in certain areas. So just another tool to use.
So the iPhone app looks like this. It's the same exact website. I don't know if you've all used this. It's called SoilWeb. It's on the App Store for free. It's the same database, and you hit Get My Location or Get Soil Data. It'll pop up here. I use this one all the time because, as you're both pointing out, if you're in your office about to go to the field, great. But if you're at the site, then you can screenshot the soil types that you're on. So I'm sitting on the Flanagan, which is one of the dominant soil types in this part of Illinois. Anyway, so this is pretty cool. Then if you click the actual soil type, it gives you all of the data on what the deal is on the soil, how it formed. There's also a bottom tab if you look at the details and description. I think you can make that out. And if you click that, you get soil chemical data mapped with the soil. So the app is pretty neat for looking at your soil type.
All right. Well, thank you, Andrew. That was a fantastic presentation. And I'm going to encourage everyone to try to come up with at least one question. You surely have one question in you that you need some information on with understanding soil a little bit better. Soil is arguably our most precious natural resource. And it's something that we are exporting the most of in the United States, and we're exporting it for no return on the investment. We just flush it out into the sea, and we create dead zones in the ocean and cause a lot of damage. So we as humans need to learn more about soil. We need to ask questions, and we need to communicate a lot about soil. So I'm going to start with reading some of the questions. So the first question comes in from Hannah Bangs, and the question is, in what ways does rain contribute to higher acidity? As for California's more alkaline soils, would it be possible to mix ground coffee or Cascara into the soils to enhance acidity? Great question. Who wants to answer that?
So to address the first part of the question as far as rainfall goes, so rainfall is typically going to have a pH of right around 7 because it's essentially pure water. So in areas where the pH is high, we will see that in heavy rainfall years, the pH is actually lowered by increased rainfall. So in years of drought, issues with pH and the other issue I didn't really address, but another issue that we have in California is soil salinity. So both pH and salinity become increasingly a problem in years of drought. The question about the coffee and Cascara, I do believe they are acidic, but that is, I would have to double check on that one. I don't know. And you would have to use a significant amount of them to actually start to influence the pH of the soil. Typically for soil pH management, what we're using is elemental sulfur. So it's a 90% sulfur that's just a mined material to bring down the soil pH. And that's for actual soil applications. The other options are to actually inject some sort of acid into your irrigation water to bring the pH of the irrigation water down. So you can use acetic acid or citric acid for organic production, or you can use phosphorus or sulfuric acid for conventional production to bring the pH of the irrigation water down. But yeah, the Cascara, I'd have to double check. I don't know if anybody.
We've measured it a few times because a lot of small holders that we work with, that's their only fertility input. And on your point, Connor, recycling back, it's at least a way to mitigate what you're exporting if you return that waste. It's around 3.5 to 4. It's pretty acidic. That changes with how long it's been out. We looked at different composting stages, but yeah, it's really low pH. And I think it was Hannah, to answer your question about precip, Connor gave like a very year-to-year broad picture over geological timescales, like thousands of years, where you get less precipitation, you get more alkaline soils. And when you get more precip, then it's more acidic. And if they're balanced, rather, if you balance evapotranspiration, so plants breathing and then just the abiotic loss, where that balances with precip, which is a very rare case, then you have circumneutral soil. So if you look at pH maps of the US, I recommend it. You can just see a clear precip gradient once you cross the Mississippi, and as you go west to the Rockies, precip falls off and pH tracks very well with that. So if you're looking at overall regions, if you don't know the pH, if you look at a precip map, it's a pretty good indicator of where you might expect pH to be low or high.
Nice. Our next question comes in from Guyana. She's a grower in North County, San Diego. And she was asking the name of the app, and that is Soil Web is the name of the app. Okay, and now we're going to move on. Our next question is from Caitlin Odell. Caitlin is our field manager in Ventura, Santa Barbara, the counties north of Los Angeles, and she's a wealth of information. So if ever there's a question we can't answer, she might chime in if she feels like it. But her question is, NRCS soil maps are extremely valuable when assessing farmland. How are the NRCS maps developed, and how can they become more precise, or how they have become more precise?
Connor, you and me?
I don't have too great of an answer for that one. Andrew, you might know more. I mean, I know I had a professor who worked for the NRCS back in the day, and they actually he said he just drove around Arkansas and they would pull soil samples and classify them. And that's literally.
I'm wondering if it was done by hand or not, because on like a quarter acre, sometimes here, especially on the slopes, you'll see 5-6 different soil types.
Yeah,
so I'm wondering if it's done by satellite or if they've got a crew going out there. I mean, that's a hard job.
Yeah, they started by hand pulling samples from, just from across the country. But then I think they mapped it with, using some sort of inference based on the land slope and that kind of thing. But
then I do like kind of comically question how accurate the soil types are, because if you're hitting that Paleolithic bedrock at 16 inches and it's 3 o'clock on a Friday, it's 100 degrees out, you're like, well, I guess it's just kind of crappy. But we're trying to answer that.
So I have an answer. One might, so yeah, it's a mix. Sometimes there is like let's just go out and sample. And most soil, obviously, so here's an example on the website that Ben and Connor had linked to. I put in the address in the search, and then I clicked what's called the AOE. So in fact, I should probably walk people through this. It might be useful. What you want to do is that you log in. I'll just start over. This is going somewhere with the answer to your question. So I guess it preloads the address. I put in Davis, California. And then you want to click what's called the Area of Interest AOI. So let's just click this box. And then you say, tell me what soil types are in that region. This can only go to, I think, 40,000 acres, so you can't look at the whole state of California. Then you click the tab here that says Soil Map. So I'm walking you all through because this, if you don't know, it might take you hours to figure it out. You click the soil map, and this is what you really want. This tells you the soil types in that box that you highlighted. So you've got this thin orange line, and then those letters correspond to, on the left-hand panel, your soil types. The way to find out about your soil type is you want to go by the first word. That's the soil series name. The series name is named after the soil scientist's spouse, the Native American tribe that lived nearby, or the local town. The names are just random. So you probably heard of the YOLO series in NorCal. That's the most productive land in Northern California. And it tells you in that area that you had boxed what the percent of that area is by that soil type. So in this area, 40% of soils are the rincon silty loam. And if you click these, they link you to more information. So one question is, how are they getting this? And how they get this is that they're obviously not going to every little bit of this map and digging a pedon. So a pedon is a three-dimensional individual soil. Soils are individuals, just like you and I are manifestations of Homo sapiens. A pedon is a manifestation of any soil type. And they're not doing this empirically for every single place. They'll dig probably 4 to 5 of each soil type that they think exists in each county. So there's still hundreds of soils. Keep in mind that this effort began in 1928. It's taken about 80 years to map most of the US. Now they're still interpolating like all maps, and they do that by geomorphology. So if you're on this kind of a slope and it's an alluvial fan from Puda Creek coming down from the Coast Range in Yolo County, likely that you're going to be on a YOLO or on a rincon. So that's how they're inferring. And that's also the big caveat here, is that maps are maps. The soil type that you actually have may be different from what is actually mapped at your site. Keep in mind that erosion can change things a lot. So because if you lose the top layer or two, then it changes the soil type. It's no longer what you would expect. So if you find that the soil types on your app don't match what you're seeing, that it could be so, but it probably is going to confer with a nearby soil type. So the cousin soils are the ones that are typically listed nearby.
Great. So our next question again is from Guyana, and it's a question on inputs. What's the pH of Humacs?
And it is 11 to 13. So Humacs is buffered with potassium hydroxide to keep it shelf stable. And why don't we do, let me try it. So if you go to greenbook.net, it's a nice little resource. And you can type in Humacs labels, and then you get Humacs. And if you click on the SDS, the safety data sheet, and this is the Humac safety data sheet. You can see right here, you have the pH is listed at 11 to 13. And then somewhere on here they have the ingredient. Yeah, so and then the components here, you have humic acid derived from leonardite, but then potassium hydroxide is a very alkaline chemical used to buffer acidic materials to make them shelf stable. So even though it is called humic acid, it does have a high pH. There we go.
All right. Our next question comes in from Jerry Johnson, who's a future Fringe coffee grower. And his question is on microbial bacteria. How important is it? And can molasses be fed microbial bacteria in soil and improve the soil health?
Where are you seeing this? Which question was this?
They're in the, oh, sorry, that was sent privately. So I'll repeat the question.
Okay. Yeah, could you read it?
Microbial bacteria, and how important can molasses be fed microbial bacteria in soil and improve the soil health?
Yeah. So molasses can be used to stimulate microbial activity in the soil. I've not studied it in coffee production, so I'm not sure to what extent you would see a benefit. So that's my experience with molasses.
Can't hurt. It's a substrate. The microbes love it. There's a lot of work out here with corn, soybean acres, because that's what we grow, on biostimulants. Can you add non-nutrient things like food for the microbes, or can you add the microbes themselves, the bug in a jug type approach? It's really not panning out too much because I think it's a lot more complex than that. And I think of probiotics with the human gut. You can inoculate your gut by drinking probiotics, eating fermented foods, but if you don't have the right environment, it's not going to take hold. If you keep eating McDonald's, doesn't matter how much kimchi or probiotic yogurts you take, it won't really root. And I think it's the same for cropping systems. If you don't manage in a way like without cover crops, all the biostimulants that you want to add won't have an effect on your soil.
It's unscientifically, we do inject it along with organic fertilizers here in molasses. So.
Cool.
Better.
What do you mean by unscientific?
Yeah, I mean, so we do it.
Oh, I'm curious, have you tried to compare it side by side? Because you said unscientific, but it sounds like there's a good reason maybe to do it.
Yeah, you know, it came from, there's a guy, George Snackenberg. He's I haven't met anyone that knows organic fertilizers quite like him. He's been doing it for 25 years, worked for Driscoll. I mean, and it's his suggestion. And so we did, well, I guess we did harvest this year from a farm that we've been using it regularly. The farm, I think I would define it as, I mean, the soil's quite sterile. It actually used to be nursery greenhouses that were torn down. Yeah, so just really rocky soil that would be great for olives, I would say. And so we've been injecting quite a bit of molasses, and I think Ben maybe cupped a 91 or 90-point coffee off of that farm this year. The weeds grow very well, so I think the soil's is quite active with, and maybe it's helped. I don't know. I don't have any data against it. So.
Well, we are going to make this scientific because she's talking about Valley Heart Ranch, and they're going to take part in the study. So we'll hopefully get maybe some information on this. They're one of the 4 farms that we're working with the Whittier study where we're doing Good Land Organics, Valley Heart Ranch, Miraz, Family Farms, and Quail Haven. So we're just starting to get some initial results, and Andrew's doing some of the lab analysis there. I know at Valley Heart they put a lot of compost in the soil before the planting as well.
Yeah. Horse manure, I would say. Yeah, their coffees are cupping very well. It's their first harvest, so it's very exciting. So getting back to the questions, so we have Hannah Bangs. She's asking, is that organic or naturally occurring? So you might need to give us a little bit more context there, Hannah.
Is she still here? Oh. I think the question might have been referring to the elemental sulfur because she had the question about pH prior. Yeah. So if that's the case, the elemental sulfur is it's an organic OMRI listed product. So it's naturally occurring. Yeah. All
right, great. Yeah, she might have taken off. All right, so now we're going to get a question from our friend Jason Miller. Jason, if I am up to date, is a employee with Blue Bottle Coffee up in the Bay Area, and he's asking, are the predominant factors with respect to coffee quality and productivity soil nutrients and climate? If so, does this mean that it's possible to grow coffee anywhere so long as the soil is identified, amended, and the climate elements are controlled or existing within the correct range?
I would say yes. You know, without, you know, I don't want to get too general, but yeah, if you can, you know, if you were to set up a greenhouse and you're able to control the climate and soil conditions, I don't see any reason not to. I mean, as long as you're not too far north where day length becomes an issue, that would be the only thing I could think of that might be a challenge. You know, if you're too far north and you have short winter days and long summer days, I don't know what that would do to the fruiting and flowering cycle. But yeah, if you could get climate and nutrients dialed in, I think you could do it.
Yeah.
Just about anywhere.
Why not?
Yeah, coffee is currently grown in 70 different countries, so it's got a pretty wide geographical range in which it's currently being cultivated.
Also,
all right.
we haven't really bred for coffee, right? We've been taking the varieties that have been selected for, but excuse me, people have bred for them, especially in governments of tropical located countries like El Salvador. Used to have a pretty good program of breeding. Guatemala has Ana Café, still doing work. But I mean, to Connor's point, you could maybe breed coffee for northern latitudes like we've done for other crops. Like soybean was domesticated in temperate northern regions, and now it's grown in Brazil on the equator. That took a lot of breeding, but if you think about the relative investment and not just the fertility, but also the breeding of coffee, I mean, who knows what it could do? And then the amount of diversity of coffee species in Ethiopia that's untapped, it might be pretty versatile. So, but breeding perennials is a pain.
Yeah. And in Ethiopia, there's a purported over 1,000 different varietals of coffee, and they have a pretty much a closed system with regard to sharing research around those varietals, and it's a punishable offense to kind of smuggle seeds out of there. You can get banned from the country. So they haven't really been a good participant in the international research community when it comes to coffee. And, you know, I think they have a relatively good reason. They consider it to be their national treasure, and they don't just want to be kind of giving it away to people. But you know, it's thought that that's where, well, that's reportedly the birthplace of all of the original coffee plant material. Yeah, so back to some of the questions. All right, so Douglas Marshall, where are you seeing the effects of climate change mostly on growth internationally? The LA Times reported that by 2100, the state's average temperature could be 5.6 to 8.8 degrees Fahrenheit higher than it was in the early 1900s. Is this a concern for the development of Fringe's goals? More curiosity, disregard the question if it's, no, it's fine. We don't need to disregard the question. Yeah, so I personally, I don't even use, I try to not use the word climate change. I try to use the word climate crisis. And I think it's the defining topic of our generation. I think it's the most important subject that can be discussed, and it's very interconnected with soil. The kind of projections for 2030, for 2050, for 2100 right now are catastrophic. There won't be humans potentially in 2100 to register the temperature. It's that bad. And I think we need to have kind of an all systems, everyone on board approach to approaching the challenge. And it's something that Fringe takes extremely seriously. And in terms of the effects of the international coffee growing community, I think the most immediate and kind of identifiable effects are inconsistencies in the season, which make it very difficult for growing things. If you have a hurricane during your flowering season, that's going to greatly impact your yields. So there's just the general weather pattern inconsistency that's associated with the climate crisis is a big deal. The proliferation of pests and diseases that are kind of related to the climate crisis are impacting growers directly. The National Climate Science Board, I'm messing that up, some association has kind of said that about 50% of the usable land that's currently being used for cultivating coffee in the tropics will be unusable by, I think it's 2050. So it's already having a major impact on coffee producing, especially when coffee demand is supposed to increase by 50% over that same period of time. Who wants to go?
And you know, obviously, with sensitivity to climate change and you know the impacts that will be devastating. If the warming predictions are true, that will mean that there will be areas potentially in more northern latitudes that are going to become more adapted to growing coffee. So areas where they currently have colder winters to where they cannot produce coffee. If the temperature is to increase, coffee may become a viable option, you know, in places like the Central Valley. Just, you know, it could push coffee production to further northern latitudes, just as a, you know, kind of a, I guess, a positive spin on a, you know, touchy subject. So.
Yeah, it does seem like all the models, there's a scientist in the UK, Aaron Davis, with 2 A's, Aaron. He's done a lot of work. He's the one doing that work that the LA Times piece, Ben, I think, was referring to. And what their group is showing is that because of warmer temperatures at night, especially, it'll be too difficult for flowers to survive. Flowers in general, whether it's corn or coffee, they need cool temperatures at night for the pollen to survive. And this is the issue with the mountainous, or the use of slopes. You know, slopes, as you go up the slope, it gets cooler, but the area goes down, right? So you can't keep moving up and keep the area that's being cropped the same. There's talk of Robusta as like the savior here. If we have rootstock of Robusta and Arabica on that might be a way to mitigate not just soil diseases or nematodes, but also climate change. But there's evidence that that's kind of a Hail Mary approach. So, I mean, the answer to that question is not exactly rosy, but I would agree with you, Ben, that I think we'll have bigger problems in 2100 if it does get that bad.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the climate crisis, we can't just primarily think of a technological or invention and innovation that's going to save us. You can't create something and then put it back into an extractive system and think that it's going to operate anything different than the rest of the system operates. So we really have to begin to approach the problem with kind of understanding kind of the human psychology, how we think, how we communicate, and really begin to reorganize ourselves. I think one of the interesting things about this COVID environment is that we're getting an isomorphic window into what a post-carbon society might look like. And it's a good opportunity for harvesting some insights as to how you might exist within a post-carbon society, because that is something that is coming. All right, I'll get off my scare tactics.
Ben,
So I'm going to move.
I just want to point this out. Sorry, I always look at the article by the scientists whenever there's a news piece, because sometimes there is a disconnect. But lest the LA Times piece seem dramatic, yeah, what the scientists were saying, there is Aaron Davis, is up to a full, complete reduction of Arabica production by 2080. That's in 60 years, right? Some of us might live to see that. So it does seem to point in that direction, but they're not taking into account new territories, just like other crops, like grains, like wheat will move north. We'll be growing wheat in Canada, in Alaska. You could also be growing coffee in the south part of the US as well. And I think that was maybe what the question was also getting at. Could California be the future place of coffee production? Maybe in the Sierra foothills in 50 years when it's warmer at night during the winters. So just a thought.
All right, so I'm going to go back into some other questions. I know that's a great question and a broad subject, and we'd like to dig into it more. So Guyana has another question. Would you recommend doing leaf tissue analysis on a young plant before the production age? So year one to two leaf tissue analysis. Do we recommend it?
Yes. Yes.
Connor's saying yes.
Yeah, I think it always helps to have more data to help tune in your fertilization plan. Especially because those first 2 years, it's very critical in our environment to be putting on as much growth as possible for them to be able to survive the colder temperatures in the winter. So yeah, I think probably once a year is probably sufficient through the first couple of years.
All right, moving on. Another question from Jason Miller. Does Arabica grafted onto Robusta rootstock affect the Arabica's quality? There is, it's a common practice in Guatemala to graft rootstock onto different plants with coffee, and they currently have different species like Gesha grafted onto Arabica's quality, onto Arabica. Am I saying that? Okay, let me say that again. They have Gesha with Robusta rootstock on it. And does it affect the quality? Everything affects the quality. So yes. Can you notice? Well, people have different opinions on that, and there's not a uniform. Some people, I talked to a Nestle plant scientist recently, and he didn't think that he could taste the difference in the Gesha that had a Robusta rootstock, but others said they could. So, but my approach to quality in coffee is that everything affects it, and you need to take it seriously, and everything could potentially add value or take it away. So still we're experimenting with some hybrids that we'll get some more information on that directly, probably over the next 3 to 5 years, start to cup some of those. So then, do you guys want to answer that? Sorry. No.
One thought might be is that it might impact it insofar as the below ground acquisition of nutrients, either mycorrhizal or root mediated, is going to be based on Robusta's approach. So if Robusta is better or worse at taking up certain kinds of nutrients, or better at taking them up under heat stress or drought stress, that will just supply nutrients to the above ground. That's a theoretical way it could work, but I think that's a great question for research, because I don't really think there's any science on that.
Yeah, and the grower might need to manage their soils differently than they might with the typical Arabica with the Robusta rootstock.
And we do see that in citrus, especially different rootstocks do take up different nutrients. So growers who have the grapefruit, there's a few different rootstocks for grapefruit, and certain ones of them aren't as efficient at taking up phosphorus and potassium. So you do have to adjust the fertilization plan. So that is a consideration because that certainly would affect quality.
And then we have Douglas put up the LA Times article in the chat room. If somebody wants to copy it there, they can grab it. We have our next question comes in from Wallace. I'm thinking this might be Ian Wallace, who's a new grower in Carpinteria, but it might be somebody else. I have heard that nematodes can have both positive and negative impacts on plant and or soil health. Is there any specific nematode to watch out for or to input with coffee?
I have heard of the Mclleland as the root knot nematode. I've heard of infestations in tropical regions. As far as our plantings here in Southern California, I've not seen anything that gives me concern as far as nematodes causing damage. But coffee being a new crop down here, we don't fully understand all of the pests. And then there are obviously just like with any organism, there are good ones and bad ones. So there are beneficial nematodes and there are parasitic nematodes. So yeah, they definitely are an essential part of the soil food chain, the soil food web. So you do need to have some, it's good to have some nematodes in the soil. But yeah, as far as some specific pests, I'm not aware of any in Southern California as of yet.
I know Hawaii has a lot of problems with that, and we brought over the extension agents from Hawaii to consult with us on the problem, and we haven't seen it in California. But it's a big problem in Hawaii. Do you have anything you want to add on that, Andrew?
No, we've seen a lot of insect macrofauna pressure on Arabica in Guatemala and in Robusta in the Amazon. So we're talking, in Spanish, it's ojo de gallo. It's a grub, basically. Ojo de gallo, sorry, I'm not, pico de gallo. And it's this grub, it's some larval stage of something. I don't know insects very well. And that is their main root disease challenge. But I've never come across the nematode question with these producers in the tropics. But I think the question also asked whether they can do good things. Yeah, I mean, these nematodes are really the drivers of the soil food web. We give too much credit, I think, to microbes like bacteria. They get all the credit. And there's lots of saprophytic fungi and lots of macrofauna, earthworms, and nematodes who break down organic matter. So they do a lot of good.
All right. So Douglas Marshall was asking, can you share the Aaron Davis article, Andrew?
Yes, I think it's the next link in the chat.
Okay. Yep. All right. And then next question, we have Hannah Bangs. Knowing that the climate crisis can cause higher temps in Southern California, are you worried about growing coffee down there? Is there any event that you could see happening which could cultivate a coffee growing environment that closes the loop? I think high temps are a big concern. We can have a lot of damage to the crop with extremely high temperatures. There are kind of behaviors which we can encourage our growers to enact in order to kind of prevent damage to their crop during high heat events. Keeping the surface temperature as low as possible. So some additional watering is important. I think we should all be extremely concerned about the climate crisis across the board, not just for coffee, but all plant life and human life. Is in terms of, we do have some experimentation going on with coffee growing in hoop houses, but we don't have any kind of harvest data on those yet. So we're experimenting with relatively closed systems. It's not like a biosphere type of an arrangement, but they are in pots in hoop houses right now.
Yeah, I unmuted myself. It feels scary, but I guess I was just wondering if you know more about climate forecasts. Are you guys planting up north also in other areas where maybe eventually it will be a good season, like when a tree is reached? Like, is a tree able to reach maturity in a system that doesn't yet support it but might soon?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So currently we have coffee as far north as Morro Bay, and we're planting some additional new plantings up in the San Luis Obispo County. And we could potentially try a site in Big Sur at a human potential school called Esalen Institute. And we do get a lot of inquiries from growers in the north that are interested in planting. Our experience with the more northern plantings is that the cooler temperatures really slow down the cherry maturation process. So we have already a very slow cherry maturation process right now. And if it gets any slower, it's not really an annual crop to work with. We're already at a 10 to 12 month cycle. So yeah, we're gonna potentially open the door. When I get a request from a new grower in Northern California, I tell them that I'm not going to be the one to tell you not to do this, because a lot of people laughed at us when we did this. But I will tell you is that we don't really have the infrastructure in place to provide you good support in Northern California. You need post-harvest services, you need field managers, and you're also at a much higher risk of cooler temperatures and frost. But there's definitely some banana belts in Northern California where you could grow coffee. It's just a matter of selecting those sites and having good support systems in place. I don't know how a grower would manage the post-harvest. They can't expect to drive their cherry seven hours down to Goleta. Be a pain. You'd probably be doing it at least 5 times a year. So
yeah, great, thank you.
All right, so then Guyana has another question or a comment. My understanding of climate change crisis problem is not just the raising temps, but temps and other weather extremes like drought and floods. Yeah, so I think that's exactly, it's the total irregularity, the inconsistency, and it's those dramatic kind of weather events which just make growing anything extremely challenging. I think this winter of 2020, North County, San Diego had some record cold temperatures for a short period of time. So it is the, yeah. Do you guys have anything you want to add on that?
If you irrigate, that might help. I mean, lots of the developing world that is growing most of the world's coffee, they don't irrigate, so they're in trouble if there's no rainfall. But in the California context, if you can irrigate, in fact, you kind of have to, right?
Yeah.
It might make that a moot point on the precipitation end. But for, yeah, these heat waves or cold waves, that's not good.
Yeah, and you can also mitigate some of the frost damage through irrigation. You can also increase the surface ground temperature if you put some water out there prior to a frost, which is predicted. So that can help you out there with doing some preventative maintenance on the coffee plant. And yeah, I think, you know, we are taking a little bit more of a scientific approach, having kind of started our industry at a later date. And so we're kind of getting a lot of research projects on coffee and learning a lot more about the specifics of what a coffee plant needs to thrive. And then also focusing on the plant breeding program to focus on crop protection genetics as well as an opportunity that we are trying to put a lot of resources in at Fringe Coffee, and develop new plant material which is more ready to withstand extreme climate temperatures. All right. So I'm not seeing any other questions up there. Does anyone have any kind of closing statements that they want to part with? All right. Well, we got one question coming in from David's iPhone. What resources seem to be the best in weather forecast for both extremes? Connor, what do you use for weather forecasting?
Sorry, I just had to plug my computer in. I just honestly, I just use Weather Underground. It's just a website. I mean, yeah, I don't have any more accurate resources than that, really.
Yeah, there's one that Jay uses. I forget what it is, but I'll pull it up and send it over to you. David, what's your last name? Just because I know a lot of Davids, I just see David. Is it? Oh, Wallace. Okay, gotcha. I'll send you over what we use. All right. Well, then, does anyone else have any lingering questions? You can jump in and interrupt me. But I think with that, we'll kind of close this first session. And thank you to Connor and thank you to Andrew for your presentations. And thank you to everyone for taking part. And we'll look forward to your engagement at the next one on September 17th from 1 to 3 p.m. We'll be looking at biological activities and how those affect the cup quality. All right. So cheers. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.